The Marquette, Michigan story is a story that started in the 1970s in Evanston, Illinois, out of the friendship and collaboration and thinking together of John McKnight and Tom Ray. And then when Tom Ray became the Bishop of Northern Michigan, ABCD came there with him. And out of that became the model of mutual ministry. And one of the things really important in this story is how the church has become organized to build community both outside and inside, where everybody has the responsibility mutually to take care of one another. It's not up to the staff and the pastor, it's up to everybody. And there's an energy and a vitality that creates that you'll see. The second point that I really want to emphasize is how the Diocese of Northern Michigan has stopped helping people, has made the decision that their efforts are going to be towards people helping themselves, not towards them helping clients. That they have taken seriously the idea that everyone has gifts.
Marquette, Michigan. A small town situated on the shores of Lake Michigan on the Upper Peninsula. With a population of 20,000 people, Marquette is one of the larger centers in the region and is home to the Episcopal Diocese of Upper Michigan. The diocese is responsible for ensuring its 27 congregations remain vital and engaged. No easy task in a region that covers over 17,000 square miles of rural countryside. Retired Bishop Tom Ray was a close friend of John McKnight, and the diocese was one of the first organizations to embrace the principles of ABCD. As Tom discovered, the church was structured like most professional organizations, and this structure was at the heart of its struggles.
The problem is that the professionals have then taken away the responsibility of the individual baptized, so that the servant ministry is done by deacons, the reconciling ministry is done by priests, and the oversight is done by bishops, and all of a sudden lay people baptized, the citizens, have very little responsibility except, as Jim Kelsey will say, to gather around the minister, to congregate around the minister, and to pay their pledge. And what this simply does is it's a recipe for paralysis. It's a recipe for the collapse of responsibility on the few, and it's a crushing responsibility, so that this is not only unhealthy for the baptized, who are now pauperized, but it's unhealthy for the ordained, who now have this crushing responsibility that really screws up families and human lives. So it's clear that ABCD has a message here in terms of seeking the gifts, the competence, the capacities of the individuals within the community, not simply the 2 or 3 leaders.
The term pauper is defined as a poor person who is the recipient of government relief or charity. It symbolizes the way many organizations are structured and the way they relate to the people they serve. Whether it's education, medicine, government, or religion, the prevailing relationship is one of exclusivity, where the professionals, experts, or leaders share their expertise to help solve the problems for their passive consumers. It's a relationship where the leaders have the strength, while the recipients are weak and needy. The Episcopal Diocese has dealt with this organizational inequity quite intentionally by creating what they call mutual ministry, a concept that creates an inclusive organization.
Well, what it really means is that the job description of the clergy, per se, is not to minister to the congregation, but to strengthen and engage the community in their own ministry. That changes the dynamic completely, in that now the whole community works together to identify opportunities for outreach, for ministry, for engaging the wider community, and works together to do that. It's a whole different shift in understanding. Some have said it's like moving from a passenger ship, like a cruise ship image, to a cargo ship, where everyone on board has gifts, has a job, has a responsibility, and is involved in the mission of what the voyage is about.
This shift has revitalized the diocese and has strengthened the congregations. Instead of simply attending a sermon and benefiting from the teachings of the priest, everyone participates and shares in the responsibility of the congregation and the community. ABCD has transformed the church, and it's changed the way in which the congregations reach out and engage the community. The citizens of Marquette were provided an incredible opportunity for outreach when the K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base closed suddenly in 1995.
A decade or two ago, the K.I. Sawyer was the third largest population center in the Upper Peninsula. Had about 11,000 people living there, and overnight it disappeared. All of the residences became vacant. All of the buildings that were used for the military operations became vacant. A huge airstrip just sitting there, and it was a real feeling of abandonment, and of course a real blow to the economy and the population base in the area here.
But with change comes opportunity, and it wasn't long before the municipality, developers, and the public began taking advantage of the abandoned assets at Sawyer.
Here is a unique opportunity for community development, simply because here are people moving in without a sense of community, without a history together. It's a strange kind of situation because the houses are all complete and the utilities are all in place, and a lot of the basic fabric of community life are there. And yet there are some serious deficits in the sense of no grocery store, no gas station, police protection from the next town over, fire protection from the next town over, and so on. No real care for students. The school is overcrowded. There is just a tremendous amount of need.
It was an opportunity for some inexpensive housing, and so there were people that moved in. It started with maybe 1,000. Now there's almost 3,000 people that live there. So it's a community of very diverse people. There are people that have come from some of the local outlying areas, but there's also people who have moved in from other states and from lower Michigan. There are people of different economic levels, different races. So it's a very diverse community, but it's a very disconnected community. They don't have relationships with one another. There aren't the connections like in an old neighborhood. At least you have some kind of a connection, but this is all, it's just a new community, so there's no connection, no relationships built.
The typical response from government and other helping organizations would be to gather their resources and head into the community to solve the problems. For surely the needy citizens or paupers of Sawyer needed their expertise and leadership. This helping attitude, the need to solve problems for people, is hard to break, even for organizations that have embraced the principles of ABCD.
We were tempted initially to go in and identify a problem and try to respond to it. For instance, to set up an after-school program, such as we had going on in a town down the road in Gladstone, and or a family resource center such as we had in another town in the diocese in Houghton. We said to ourselves, we know how to do those things, we've done them elsewhere, so we'll just come and do that here too. And there must be a need, because here are these kids sort of wandering around in the streets after school with no place to go, and we can meet that need. What we discovered though, and I guess really we're reminded of through the ABCD principles, was that if we were to come in from outside and try to address these problems, to become sort of suppliers of service to meet that deficiency, to meet that need, to meet that weakness, we would be, in a sense, reinforcing the weakness that was there. and that instead, just as when we look to our congregations for the gifts that are within those communities to identify what ministry we're called to, we might engage the community in conversations which help identify what their gifts are and how they could address their opportunities for working together. And that would not only strengthen the community, it would also address the problems and needs along the way, but not in a way that defines them by their weakness, but rather by their strength.
So the diocese decided that the best way to support the fledgling community of Sawyer was to determine what gifts and strengths were already in place in the citizens, and to connect and mobilize them to act on their own behalf. To accomplish this, they hired community organizer Jin Ministo to meet with and learn from the people living at Sawyer. It's a unique role that requires the right personality and perspective.
One thing we're clear about is that a community organizer is not someone who has the skills and the desire to come in and run the show in the sense of being a provider of care to those who are in need, but rather one who has the skill to engage others, one who is a great conversationalist, one who enjoys people, one who sees the strengths in others, one who helps people connect with each other.
In this role, Jin is ideal. Her warm and gentle personality allows her to engage others easily. While still early in the project, she's had a great deal of success in identifying leaders in the Sawyer community and in supporting and encouraging them to mobilize other citizens. Through their conversations, they're learning about the priorities at Sawyer from those living in the community. Asset-based community development will have a long-term impact on the Sawyer community, just as it has had on the diocese itself. We'll leave the final word to Tom Ray.
In our venue, in this diocese, we would be moving further and further away from hierarchy, if you can believe the church moving away from hierarchy and moving more and more toward a circular, collaborative leadership. And what this means is now that rather than one person in a small congregation as the pastor having responsibility, now there's an ownership among all of the members, citizens baptized of that community or congregation. And part of it is, when there's a decision, we'll ask how many fingerprints are on it. And if there are only my fingerprints, it isn't going to be owned. Others will not take responsibility or feel involved in it. But if it has a myriad of fingerprints, then that ownership is what will make it work, and always does.